Hey everybody, Chris White with the American Battlefield Trust, and I'm standing at one of the coolest sites I've had the opportunity to visit while I've been with the American Battlefield Trust. I'm in Charleston Harbor. I'm overlooking Charleston Harbor from a place called Fort Johnson. Fort Johnson has its ties all the way back to 1704 during the colonial era, and it's named after Nathaniel Johnson, who is the colonial governor of the Carolina colonies at one point. This is a strategic point in Charleston Harbor. The Ashley River will flow into Charleston Harbor from the south. From the north, you'll have the Cooper River coming together to form that Charleston Harbor, and you need to make this area defensible because Charleston, during the Revolutionary era, is the fourth largest city in the colonies and it is the most prosperous port. So we need to defend this area. So in 1704, well before the American Revolution, we'll have a fortification placed here. That fortification will be replaced. And by 1765, we have Crown forces out here who have a small fortification. And this fortification will house Stamp Act papers during that Stamp Act crisis of 1765. In fact, Fort Johnson will be threatened to be destroyed by Patriot forces, but it'll be taken eventually by the Patriots when the Revolutionary War is initiated. So in September of 1775, William Moultrie, who's soon to become famous here in the Charleston area, he's in command of the 2nd South Carolina Regiment. He's ordered to seize Fort Johnson by the Council of Safety. Moultrie is going to send out a cadre of officers and men, about 50 men, about 150 men will come out here, commanded by some of the most famous names in the Revolutionary War era, including Charles Pinckney and Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. They'll come out here, they will capture Fort Johnson and hold it for the Patriot forces. And in fact, this is maybe the first time that the new South Carolina flag was raised over property previously controlled by the crown, by King George III and his forces. So it's a symbolic victory for the Carolinians, even though in reality it's kind of minor. Later on, William Moultrie becomes famous because he is going to defend a Palmetto fort up on Sullivan's Island on the north side of Charleston Harbor. That becomes eventually Fort Moultrie, which plays into the American Civil War, as does Fort Johnson. Fast forward into the 19th century, Fort Johnson down here will be kind of reconstructed a few different times. Storms will come through here, wash some things out, but the Army knows that it's important, as is Charleston Harbor. So by 1861, early 1861, we have fortifications starting to ring Charleston Harbor. We have Castle Pinckney, which is in basically the mouth of the two rivers, right out where the Charleston Harbor is formed between the Ashley and Cooper rivers. Then we have Fort Moultrie on the north side of the harbor. To the south side of the harbor, we have this Fort Johnson. And then in the middle of the harbor, roughly we'll call it the middle of the harbor, we have what is the most famous fortification of all, and that is Fort Sumter, which was not here during the Revolutionary War era. Well, how does Fort Johnson play into the story of Fort Sumter? On the morning of April 12, 1861, Confederate forces, some 500 or so men around the Charleston Harbor, will be preparing for battle. They'll be setting their sights on Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is held by Major Robert Anderson, a Kentuckian, who has about 85 officers and men inside of Fort Sumter, which he felt was the most defensible fort here in Charleston Harbor. And at about 4:30 in the morning, a mortar shell will be fired, an arc into the air from Fort Johnson. A mortar is a large cannon, it's a squat cannon that will fire on an angle and fire a shell that is in a arcing trajectory. So it'll let gravity do the work. It'll fire the shell up into the air, it'll arc, and then start to come back down and let gravity pull it down to earth. But at about 4:30, 4:35 on the morning of April 12th, 1861, a mortar shell explodes over top of Fort Sumter. When that shell explodes, that is the signal to initiate the bombardment of the fort. And for the next 34 hours, Pierre-Gustave Toutant Beauregard, the Confederate commander in the Charleston area, and his gunners will fire upon Fort Sumter. Anderson and his garrison will hold out for about 34 hours. There'll be a fire within Fort Sumter, which is going to be critical. It could explode the powder magazine within there. So Anderson eventually calls for terms of capitulation. The Confederates are very quick to accept the surrender of Fort Sumter, which will include a 100-gun salute to the American flag. They will allow Anderson and his men to get on a ship and head back up to New York City, where they receive a hero's welcome. And in fact, the only casualties during the Battle of Fort Sumter on the federal side will take place during that firing of that 100-gun salute. One of the guns will prematurely explode and kill one man and mortally wound another. The man whose kill was Private Daniel Huff, a 19-year-old private, and he is the first casualty down here in Charleston. But for the next few years, throughout the American Civil War, Fort Johnson is held by Confederate forces. Charleston is ringed again by fortifications, and the Federal Navy and Army try to take it time and again. It's not until February of 1865 that the city itself will fall. But out here at Fort Johnson, we have the opportunity to save a portion of the land. This land is overseen by the South Carolina Wildlife and Marine Resources Department. The Medical College of Charleston own part of this land out here as well. So it's a neat site that most people don't get out to. There's a monument to the first shot of the Civil War. You have a magnificent view of Fort Sumter. You can see that from the shoreline here. You can see out into the harbor. You can see the lighthouse up on Sullivan's Island that marks the general vicinity of where you can at least know where Fort Moultrie is. You can look back into the city. So this piece of land here has just ties all the way back to the Revolutionary War era, the colonial era, the Civil War era, and this is where the first shot of the American Civil War was fought. Well, not specifically on this piece of land we're saving, but right next to it here, because Fort Johnson was a large fortification on James Island here outside of Charleston. So we hope that you can help us to preserve this land. If you ever get a chance to come down here to James Island, if you ever get a chance to come out here to this Fort Johnson site, there is a monument that I mentioned to the firing of that first shot that was placed here in 1961 on the 100th anniversary of the American Civil War. And there's also a powder magazine. This powder magazine dates back to the 1760s. It was actually buried by Confederate soldiers during the American Civil War, and that's probably what saved it. It's a brick structure. It's about 27 foot by 20 feet. The interior has been changed because it needed to be reinforced for the earth to be placed on top of it. You want to bury a powder magazine, so in case shells come crashing in and a direct hit hits it, it won't explode. So that's one of the reasons that that building is still here. The Daughters of the American Revolution in 1934 placed a plaque on that structure. So it's a really neat structure to come down here and see. And it's adjacent to, not on, but adjacent to that land that we're trying to preserve down here in Charleston. So if you have an opportunity, head over to battlefields.org, learn more about this effort here to preserve the land at Fort Johnson. Also learn more about the battle at Fort Sumter. You can check out our animated map, which we use some of that here in this video to learn more about Fort Sumter. And we, of course, hope that you'll learn more about the efforts that we have at battlefields.org to preserve land around the nation associated with the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, and the American Civil War. I'm Chris White on behalf of the American Battlefield Trust. Thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting battlefield preservation and education.